Social security are deserved while the aid to the historically marginalized innocent Roberts, instance, welfare reform for foster citizenship suggests punishment for helping achieve racial justice instead of perpetuating the racial inequalities currently held by governments to establish a remediation for the sections of institutionalized repression of the women who see as mothers who the government should be obligated to compensate for. Now, court action is key. Only a constitutional reinterpretation is sufficient to alter the trend of law. Previous rulings spilled over to justify the 50 states surveillance and discriminatory legislation. Gilman, constitution and privacy policies have been quite different to the court rather than the welfare. By contrast, the Supreme Court has been held by the people who see government as the higher rights in front of the even and court up into the division by the court and the social context in which these women live in the court. We're not comparing the class of 14th Amendment equality laws based on class would likely be insufficient. Now, our advocacy is neither a stale role-playing exercise nor an abstract idealist factory, but a concrete utopian demand to gap pried open by ending welfare surveillance and material steps against structural violence enables and surrounded by a larger yearning for freedom. This demand is both a goal and a bridge. We keep 1 foot in the possible and 1 foot reaching beyond. Weeks 11. Traditional utopia to the critical utopian manifesto of the utopian demand. The emphasis shift from estrangement, the focus on the decomposition of other worlds, increasingly fragmentary possibilities of traditional and critical utopias is ready for the utopian demand to introduce a strong estrangement effect gap between the academic and manifesto seeks to reduce the important breach by the utopian demand. The demand cannot be cut from public discourse and rise around the issue. There's a tension between the terms utopian demand and the former points of a broader social horizon to future Latin and our attention to the fact that utopian demand is not just public together tendency to rupture the terms that go altered by the relation. Specifically, utopian forms should be a demand that pointed to the possibility to break within the present while remaining grounded in concrete possibilities. The demand has to be enough in the aim to provide an expansive perspective in society in which everybody is granted an instantly equal now and in the countless wage relation by entail and citizenship and the experience of working the places of lives of the individuals. This demand is a directional demand instead of fully recovery from the economy of the state. They suggest a direction rather than an destination. The demand for basic income points to a direction populated life no longer supported to work new theory of to the parades of utopian demands to generate a political depth that exceeds specific reform. The utopian demand should be recognized as possibility grounded in existing tendencies. The point should be a concrete rather than abstract. The utopian virtue should recognize the practical possibilities of plausible current trends as opposed to the random exercise of political statements or an expert and immensely wishful thinking. The utopian demand should be registered with critical qualities with the media. They must be both strange and familiar, grounding the present and gesturing to the future. Traditional revolutionary tradition that now is the future and the cycle of the current century to exercising the media suppression, diluting the explosive reaction to long-term solution with the utopian demands of the media. Those not returning to comprehensive utopias. The utopian diet has a transformative effect greater than minor policy reform. The ultimate demand is building on perceived alternative provoking agents who might have a different future than the importance of these forms of system demand and realism is winning one is the utopian demand can be seen more as a goal rather than to process the contra. Utopian social demand can be set to allow for activists and collective practice of demanding anti-political serving demands and intersect groups and linked together broader social victory can emerge. The result is established a political desire and imagination of which alternatives might be constructed. Now, a static political security is impossible when dealing with welfare discourses of liberation domination are inextricable, making strategic combinations essential. Helium, one, there is no fixed instruction about this psychological, biological, generating of political discourse. It's also no empirical welfare claims there is no permanent separation in the context in which they are united by abuse and welfare with administration, the isolation of low educated lives, the group of rapidly and focus the responsibility. The welfare of the same women here are drawn towards the conditions that shape and work with the end responsibility. The language of politics also suggests a new conditions for assertion and empowerment. Now, we do not rely on traditional liberal approach to rights and privacy, but one that recognizes an imbrication within power relations. Helium, one, the language of privacy rights only shows how it comes from surveillance critiques have been raised by the idea of privacy, the widely shaped omission, enriching, and surveillance and meaning of the words and language of politics. The rights of privacy can be extended to different meanings and broader not special terms and concepts that are often used in current debates.
What's a citizen?
That's not central to the affirmative.
Yeah, the affirmative talks about how the Roberts evidence specifically indicates that it's key to create welfare is key to create citizenship. What is a citizen?
It's talking about how there's a difference between welfare subject and welfare citizen, i.e., we're current the Roberts 96 talks about the status quo, i.e., we're critiquing the idea of citizen.
Awesome. So when it says that welfare subjects are bad, that's a bad method. Welfare citizens are what is a citizen?
Okay, welfare citizen is a citizen. I don't have to answer that.
What is a welfare citizen then?
Okay, a welfare citizen is not defined by the Roberts Chart. Roberts says that we should expand the definition of who gets welfare such that it's
It seems like a pretty elusive definition. That's fine. Let's talk about the emerging evidence. It talks about how white males are necessarily more are going to favor things like catastrophe. Who else was interviewed in this study, in this process?
Interviewed?
Besides white males, who else was in the group, the sample group?
This isn't talking about No, the Virginia evidence is just talking about how white policymakers are mostly white and male. You would agree that Congress is mostly white
That's
and
not
male.
what the argument says. It indicates that white males, when you say congressmen,
Okay,
or
our
Congress
argument is that there's structural violence now. It doesn't happen, it generally doesn't happen to white males. So when white males like look towards risk assessment, they look towards the future and they see a catastrophic impact as opposed
that's not my
to
point. I understand the argument Virchik is making. Who else does Virchik or does the study like talk to try to get other perspectives?
Okay, we're not. I don't fundamentally understand.
You know what, that's fine. Let's talk about the solvency mechanism. None of your evidence indicates a predictive claim that any court can do the act. How do you access any solvency? So, yeah, great. What piece of evidence says the Supreme Court can do your act?
That's literally like there's so many.
I just have the best line, the one I see that makes the solvency claim.
I think that our court's a key card.
Yeah, what's the best line in the whole one I see?
Literally, Gilman 12 literally says the Supreme Court can overturn. Like,
Really? Where is the line in Gilman?
Supreme Courts can overturn its own ruling.
You're being very elusive.
No, this is just normal means. Supreme Court can overturn its own ruling.
What ruling is it overturning?
Okay, it's
The Supreme Court has held that a person who seeks governmental assistance gives up the rights to privacy even in her home.
Yeah, sure. What ruling is it overturning?
I can't name the ruling. However, they ruled previously that privacy rights, i.e. the Fourth Amendment,
So how is it normal means if there isn't a ruling it's overturning?
There is a ruling it's
Which
overturning.
one?
There, Wyman v. James, 1971.
It'll be one off in case I know it.
These sick flows.
Manipulation of the foreign domestic distinction was used to justify land theft, and the elimination of the basic rights of the Act talks about as the foundation of modern law. Churchill, the 96th the Arkansas Confederation Constitution contained Indian peoples recognized foreign. Almost every white held land title would have been founded had these standards been national law by the black country, which have been founded largely on the only lust to possess native lands was about not about privileged pretensions. The Chief Justice was forced to point a whole illegal political expression, domestic dependent, which is to encompass the unprecedented society is really concerning committing a correction whenever they were resisted. Invasion by the U.S. character balance law to conquer on the theoretical basis for Indian law, and indigenous peoples must commit cultural suicide to access citizenship. Garande and 4. More devastating than the law was it is possessors, citizenship, naturalization ceremonies, all the explicit remediation of tribal with more commonplace ceremonies, while the Indian citizens first of house of shapes above the ceremonies, they become a system of cultural suicide requiring Indians to demonstrate powerful submission to the superior forms of the norms of patriarchy, husbandry, private property, the nuclear family. Assimilated Indians were placed under jurisdiction of the state so good that when Charles II reclaimed Tennessee in 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act was passed to clean up making the unilateral imposition of citizenship decided to remove individual resistance, and the Act's use of court system is colonialistic. Court historically disregards native sovereignty and land claims. The reform arguments are empirically denied. None of their evidence assumes court solvency, which magnifies their Link Williams in 96 and failures to federal government to protecting Indian land rights of Cherokees and many other charged forces of government treaty. The federal government constructed trust protect the charges. The Supreme Court didn't hold the court in the United Congressional treaty would allow that one of the surrounding Indian original territory millions of acres of land. There's never any indigenous or Indian rights because the emphasis focuses exclusively on the white man's Indian law. These stories of the white man's Indian law focus on the legal laws of representing the course of this country. These soldiers of the Indian people's exclusive byproducts. The current Supreme Court pays virtually no attention to serves to remind us how unreliable the white man's Indian law has been because of the Supreme Court's inability to grasp the elegance of Indian origins. For the story is full of holes. We are talking, remember, about the leaders of the most modern, efficient colonizing powers, and the alternative is to kick the U.S. off the planet. Prioritization is key as a matter of sequencing. Churchill in 96, no more decolonization to ever been related within the colonialist paradigm. They succeeded. Federal domination of the North America is utterly confused about maintenance of perceived conflicts of interest between government and citizens. Non-Indians have been indoctrinated to believe that it is said that Indians get their land back, Native people do, exactly who done it, then even the most progressive still deliver a blanket stare when indigenous land rights are mentioned. The more sophisticated among them seem to divert discussion to do higher priority than land sought for actual recovery by governmental and corporate when the government controls more than what their views totally near. The states have the same rights whether they're defined citizenship by alliance for progressive. That should be precise and diminished by U.S. ministerial power stands to pave the way. The realization that whether it's anti-imperialism, environmentalism, for African American liberation, defenders will gain rights to the ending of class privilege. Revolution which has failed to free indigenous territory would simply be a continuation of colonialism. First priority to first Americans to bring the U.S. out of the Indian country. The U.S. permanently banished from the planet go on the case. Their concept of rights necessarily erases the natal autonomy of the human and instead places the birth of rights at the state. This defines the pinnacle of citizenship and justifies extermination, makes their politics impossible. Dominating the fundamental notion regarding the inscription of life, the judicial ordination, and the refugee market instead is the radical crisis of the concept of conception of rights. Based on the supposed existence of human being as such so-called sacred and inalienable rights are revealed without any protection, which is no longer possible to conceive them as rights. This is that there is no autonomous to the Lord of the nation that would like to keep from being like from the forefront of the man for the state nation, state of marching, be running the foundation of the sovereignty. The first camp for the Europeans that is controlling refugees and extermination camp represents perfectly the filtration when their rights are no longer the rights of the citizens, when human beings are truly sacred, when industrial premise is permanently residential mass of non-citizens who find themselves and cannot be naturalized or referring to find themselves as refugees. The concept of citizen is no longer adequate for describing socio-political reality of modern states. So the Museum of War Reaction Defense of Normalization down the rise before extermination camps should I mark it? Are we open to something that's already starting to happen? It is a necessary nation by the person who the very person of this person nature the only which this place has been filled out with the temple of this Robert human type day thinkable. And they also they're asking what is the evidence that case why the first states one of many decisions, all of them were mitigated by the 1996 Welfare Reform Act enacted under the Clinton administration through Congress which made it legal for surveillance to occur along with other discrimination like preventing welfare for immigrants and those considered impure like natives, which they link and makes all their impacts inevitable in force are a tool. Okay. Alright, so I just have to add. Alright, so what is spontaneous? Is it to literally keep the U.S. off the planet? Yeah, that would be what the church left. How do you choose that? Yeah, that's a question that's probably another link. It's the concept that the state is somehow inevitable and we're unable to resist it. Beyond your impossible realism stuff, how do you achieve it? Or do you just not outline the process? That obviously begs the question of what debate is. Obviously, from our limited subject positions as high school debaters, Miles and I can't go tear down the state, and you can't challenge welfare surveillance. It's just a question of the thoughts and epistemology that we process in the round. We would indicate that we have a more productive thought process than you do. Okay, it's a question of thought process. Yeah, and epistemology, methodology, etc. We've the least debate when I was like probably
the state surveils the native. What is the largest?
I'm confused about this question.
So what happens when the state surveils the native?
The Grande and Four evidence would indicate that indigenous peoples are forced to commit cultural suicide to access citizenship under welfare surveillance.
The state kind of like asserts power over it.
Also, to answer your question, it's not just the surveillance of natives. We indicate a history of colonial violence
Okay,
that includes
sure.
reservations, dumping on
That's,
people's land,
yeah, sure,
ruthless
that's,
killing.
okay, yeah, so the state exerts political power over the native. Your Government 8 evidence indicates that refugees are necessary to enact against the state. The refugees are unintelligible to the state, i.e. the state doesn't assert biopower over them. How does your Government card indicate?
There's no biopolitics. In fact, I fundamentally misunderstand the question. You're answering in a Goblin case.
Yeah, your Government card indicates that the only way to reduce the nation state is through refugees, the indigenous of refugees.
The Algonquin evidence indicates that the framing of all people like refugees
literally
is
talks about
necessarily good.
refugees. The first cancer you're
Yeah, I know it talks about refugees. It indicates that refugee framing is good as long as everyone is a refugee because you're not tied to territoriality. Rather,
You're not tied to the territory, and that's good.
Right.
So what about the indigenous people who are tied to the territory? What is
Yeah, so the churchill evidence indicates that even if indigenous people are tied to their land, which is like necessarily their business, it's a question of exerting sovereignty on others via your ability to manipulate borders and lines like states of exception, etc.
Sure. Is it indigenous or refugee? Answer. Are indigenous people refugees?
I mean, we would say that in reality, no, they are treated like quasi refugees that are like a lot of violence is carried upon.
Right. Sure. You say courts are always bad. Was Gideon v. Wainwright a good decision?
Yeah, we would indicate that while courts may have had some positive actions in the past, rather it's just the actual, not questioning the actual tools of oppression is problematic.
So they've
Yeah,
had positive actions.
Not
in the past.
necessarily.
Alright, so let's go on to your
So around like
let's go on to your welfare state. Your evidence is in context of the state at large. Why do you mean?
Yeah, we would indicate that when you enact state policy.
They read the Obama card, however, there's no link to card the plan-state process. We don't affirm the nation state, but rather recognize that the state is so entrenched in forms of political tools and welfare surveillance that the freedom of our need to reform it. And we don't make this argument because we don't say that states should give people rights. Rather, we say that we speak about it indicates that we are a concrete demand on the state, which indicates that the state should respond to our demand, which is uniquely different from the state just giving us rights as a gift. Also, the alternative position is not your like surveillance is a form of racism and conceded the requirements indicates that disproportionately affects one covenant or report and prior check. This one gender and transgender orders, and this now not
community part of the structure.
Alright, let's talk about case. The first argument you make, the weak evidence. Where does it indicate that the state would necessarily respond to your demands?
Right, so I think the argument, the weak evidence arguments, first it says that specifically the 1AC's form of concrete utopianism is critical to indicate that when we as subjects place a demand on the state, it forces the state to recognize our demand.
Yeah, can you put me a line in the evidence that would indicate that it would respond to your demands? I just don't think there's a line in the evidence that indicates the state would necessarily respond. It has no incentive to.
I mean, the argument that the court rules that this would be illegal is the reason why it's a
The weak
response to our
evidence still doesn't
demands.
indicate that. The permutation.
That's the
Would
reason
the
why we
coalitions
saw.
include Native Americans?
Sorry, what?
On the permutations, would the coalitions include Native Americans?
Yes, we think that they should include Native Americans because natives are being surveilled. They are
I'm wondering why
tribal
Native
standards.
Americans would necessarily want to be in coalitions with their colonizers.
Probably the impacts that the Lynch have made that indicates that the federal government currently surveils on native reservations and
Yeah,
in the
what piece of
context of
evidence
welfare
indicates that
means
they want, well, that they want to decrease the welfare
you don't have
surveillance?
an evidence that you don't have a piece of evidence that indicates otherwise. I think that the argument that natives would want welfare is probably empirically proven.
Okay.
Things like the federal government
Follow-up
surveilling on
question.
their land.
Where
They
do
don't
you have
want
evidence that indicates that Native Americans want to be in coalitions with you and Linda?
I don't know why that is a reason why they wouldn't want to be in coalitions with us. You don't have a piece of evidence
Alright,
that indicates that
it seems like you're speaking for others. That's a double term with your argument.
think
You're not
you're speaking
evidence
for others also.
that corporates is a term.
Sure.
I'm wondering how the act would solve for corporate surveillance over welfare recipients' citizens.
Right, so our argument is that with the weak evidence, the plan is on the endpoint rather than the process. We argue that once the court does this ruling, first it would become unconstitutional, which means that we would eliminate the rationale for reasons why the private sector would do things like welfare surveillance.
Why would
It
this
would be illegal
rationale
because,
necessarily spill over to the private sector? I
Well, first
understand
of
the
all-
lower court's argument, but why the private
first of all, it would be
sector?
illegal because the state has to contract out to the private sector. That would be illegal for the state to do. Our second argument is that the weak evidence indicates that we create coalitions that are able to challenge other forms of state dominance, which means that
Coalitions. Let's not for evidence. Where does it indicate that these short-term benefits would benefit Native Americans or other marginalized
right, the
bodies?
argument is just that marginalized bodies need to engage with the state because
Yeah,
there's
what I mean to you is that the state is accessible for marginalized bodies. What about all
Right.
the ways in which natives have been assimilated into state?
right. So our argument is that doing things like taking the U.S. off the planet is inherently bad because it means that we never engage in state practices in the first place. The state is always
Yeah,
first we make an
you're not
argument that the
answering the
state is
question.
yeah,
You're
we
not
make an argument that the state is inevitable, which means you have to engage the state in the first place.
Yeah,
That's
what
the reason
evidence
why-
do you read that the state is accessible for Native Americans?
Right, we would argue that they are able to form in our coalitions argument. We think
Do you
they
have
would
evidence
challenge
that
the
indicates the state is accessible for Native American people?
Right, I don't think
You
I need
don't.
to read evidence on that question. You also don't have evidence that they can't engage the state.
Serena,
Yeah.
on framework, be supportive of education. What was A's point?
Is everyone ready? The impact is ongoing genocide, extermination of indigenous peoples, and support structural racism, structural evidence of colonial taxes, identifying and stratifying natives, created quick policy of extermination, created false class hierarchies in the indigenous population based on the amount of white blood they had. Visa point is spirit, life, greed, or skip that. Visa point is contingency, all subsequent words of violence in American now extension colonialism, xenophobia, code of law, any movement for reformation, only course and soul language, insurance, peace, and needs our impacts are our first priority. Start this constitution that every piece of violence identified by the one is necessarily contingent upon the original policies of exclusion and native by the colonizers for surveillance was necessarily a politics of identifying who was in and who was out, which has created modern hierarchies. OC is psychological violence. Indigenous entities inseparable from the land they are intimately and psychologically tied to make it use those indigenous people in connection to the land they have personal language and connected to the voice on the land as it is a very strong over developed statistics that only 2% of our children affected being depressed, being controlled the land, not being able to connect or have access to natural prison medicine, or negative ability to use access to natural food, foraging access to water, fishing, they call
the police and the in the area dumping South state sanctioned colonial product will always value white lives more, which skews impact calculus like no one said the rhetoric of included under the perpetual coloniality as compared to providing human lives obviously under the imperial hidden identified human lives which any life of the new state becomes one measure to provide other human life classified supporting regular human life that race classification are alternatives to keep us off the planet. The negotiable evidence indicates that only a solution to right the wrongs of history, liberal products of decolonization. In other words, if you never consider native land rights because it complicates the tendency of the movement, our alternative is one impossible really demands that state return to the land where we must believe that there is a world without U.S. sovereignty. This creates an orientation that challenge colonial form in all forms and rather place rather than simply acknowledging this and moving on to issues more meaning. Here, we wanted to begin with a criticism of our place in Austin, Texas, because we all are complacent in this violence. We don't understand the physicality of this state and how it was stolen from indigenous Mexican people, which is necessarily the reason why we must put this at the forefront of our criticism. The line by line, they say it doesn't come first. First is permutation. They lead to co-option. We must construct native identities outside the state of our indigenous peoples with only close and oppressive relation, which force them to alienate themselves from their communities in the name of preventing their physical annihilation. Means it comes first. It's outbreaking which has and 5 state imposed competitive solely identities indicators of ongoing colonialism. There, citizens that have been state construct the instrumental the state's attempt to ground allowing indigenous experience of exist political designed to serve and agenda of silence around inherently done much to prove the brand colonialism and something to do so force and cooperate with state authorities. They knew these men practices of the people the very spirit as nations out. They say the alternative can't solve. The alternative solves your impact better welfare surveillance is necessarily a state policy, i.e. the alternative curtails the entire state and it's also a function of serving, not just a function of surveillance. I'm going to get to the reason why we solve the root of welfare in a little bit, but it's also a question of impossible realism. We must create an orientation within or an orientation in which we can view a world in which the United States does not exist. They say utopia, so it's probably going to be the link to the 1 ER, but it's a question of specifically acknowledging that the United States could and will not be in the future. Their utopianism posits that there's a large potentiality, but includes the United States. We must take the stance that the United States will not be in the future. The next argument is a right-wing takeover. Right-wing is necessarily a product of colonialist projects, but ultimately that form of expansion is necessarily because of that it is. And now this is a creek of institutionalism. Rather, we should not use things like the state because the state will always co-opt projects like yours in the first place. Reason where we need to have resistance on the removing those. This is the first basic permutation. You both the links are decided for permutation. That will be a little bit later on the link debate. There isn't a net benefit to permutation. Any action of the affirmative becomes irrelevant in a world without the United States. Now, first the footnote is that the permutation still be taxed on the theory of silent but necessarily normalizes it as other forms of management control and eliminates effective solvency for an assimilation. So the permutation is to invite the native into the project, which represents a suppressed desire akin to keeping your enemies closer, letting indigenous people separate themselves from colonial leaders. The first step in establishing their sovereignty. Now, Churchill says the question of first priority. We must devote it to totalizing closely examine colonialism because before we address welfare surveillance, because other colonialism built on the United States and structured its policy making. Now, the next argument is a pick. We're not a floating pick. We saw your impact. We do not do the function of the app because there would not be a court in the world of the alternative. The next argument is the basic colonial space system is you cannot solve either, but it's a question of the method that we posit. If we've created an orientation of possible reason which the United States does not exist. This is only uniqueness for the alternative because we necessarily have room to improve. We necessarily can reorient the space. It's a question of a totalizing focus which solves their offense. The next argument we go. Yeah, let's see. A few links to the affirmative. First is the state legal context reinforces state solution by defending that the state surrender should be curtailed. This statement solution still accepts the role of U.S. sovereignty in the debate space. Even a reluctance to give a link because both allows the U.S. to create positive perception of itself while submissively endorsing its colonial history to its citizenship. The Edwards and Glover part says that welfare, regardless of reforms, is built on the concept of an ideal citizen which has historically excluded minority groups like blacks, women, and native. It also inscribes a top-down approach which necessitates and legitimizes the state. Now, 3 is cultural suicide. The grande evidence that in order for indigenous people to attempt to get basic rights, they have to separate communities and instilling the nation of American culture and cites the 1924 Indian Act as the OS washing of culture and imposition of citizenship. Now, next is the courts. Like the Supreme Court's only been an issue in colonial domination. The Williams evidence indicates that decisions like the allotment and colonial fee Hitchcock systematically originated from the judicial system. They say courts have done good things, but good things for whom? The natives have never gotten a good court decision from the time that Andrew Jackson ignored John Marshall. Now, rather as a root cause, the Zurich evidence explains that the foundation of surveillance from the Panopticon of the journalists that wanted to discipline one of the rather colonial relations that highlights the ability of the settlers to monitor the native. Their neutral presentation of the obscures a specific foundation so that allows only colonialism to continue and access utopian demand. Their project of utopia, which does not explicitly reject this is colonialist logic of we'll get to it later, or yeah, it might be a stateless society, then proceeding to screw the natives. Utopianism only extends to settlers in the future, which is still overlaying. Now it has the permission. The Church 96 evidence indicates that liberal projects might be great, but even when they succeed, the new sites that they create still one located on stolen land, which makes their product automatically colonial. They say the corporations turn over on the 2 reasons why we control internal links. This first is that said friendly neoliberal policies would allow corporations to continue that. They would have all gone down plenty of times, but it's something as government, things like government, trickle down Reaganomics, and also as property rights. So companies require property rights in order for the economy to be maintained. After the state, there's no protection of property rights. Now they say speaking for others, and about Churchill, this is a key with settler colonial practice of census and quantification defines as many people. They don't have to give representative responsible manipulating my new legal codes with she rights. Now this isn't key to our criticism. It's a question of getting off land that isn't ours, let the natives decide who belongs to it and who doesn't. It's time for the US to agree that this logic leads to genocidal blood quantum policies run for the government has to promote needs well and to find agencies to have the dust which that you write in the rest of our
No coalitions?
Yeah, well, I'm going through the one.
To align with Churchill.
Yeah, so Churchill talks about things like a Colorado-based group of natives, people who want to are forming anti-state policies in the first place.
Forming anti-state policies.
Yeah,
which
or not
piece of
not
evidence
anti-policy, anti-state strategy that is good.
Okay, cool. Sure, that leads me to the next question about the alternative. I assume there would be interim steps involved as opposed to just kicking the US off the planet.
I mean,
where does Churchill account for these?
Yeah, so it's a question of impossible realism, right? The question of what are the intricate steps of keeping the US off the planet is not necessarily a question we have to answer.
Okay, so we think that we can kick the US off the planet.
Well, I mean, obviously it's a question of what we do in debate and the type of education we forward, right? Your affirmative obviously does not curtail domestic or does not curtail welfare surveillance.
Right, it's about the type of education.
Yeah, we indicate that
Okay, so how does your alternative solve for this type of education?
Yeah, it's the form of impossible realism that we must know that we must fundamentally understand, come to grips with the fact that the future is one without the United States. That essentially allows us to confront our role in violence
Churchill
and
says that
complicity in that.
we should kick the US off the planet.
Yeah.
How does your alternative solve this?
How's the alternative solved?
So is your alternative just a thought experiment, or do you?
No. So the Churchill evidence says that the second point of impossible realism, once we understand that there is literally no future in which the
Then what
United
do you
States
do?
exists.
I'm asking what you do after that. If your alternative is not just a thought experiment, what do you do after you
Well, I
realize
mean,
that the US
it's a
is
fundamental
not
question of those strategies being disclosed. Obviously, I'm not a native person. I do not know the intricacies of their movement. I do not have to. It's a question of the method we propose. Me and Lauren have forwarded a methodology in which we confront our complacency in violence by acknowledging that there is a future in which the United States does not exist.
Okay. The co-option argument.
Yeah.
The argument is in the context of indigenous people are forced to cooperate with state authorities. How is it in the context of curtailing welfare surveillance?
Yeah. So it's in the context of the permutation.
What are the case in the K? I sent out the email. Use the framework debate on the K.
During 1 hour prep, we take off this.
It's the two trips does not work.
Sorry, you said framework and then case framework.
It's actually case study framework.
Case
Yes.
framework.
All right.
One second. All right. Okay, case framework.
Alright, is anyone not ready? Okay, everybody good?
The Algonquin evidence says that contemporary politics are shaped by contrived notions of the citizen that place the origins of the humans at the nation state, the one that gives the life by the distribution of rights like welfare that justifies extermination as a creates a necessary divide between the citizen and the refugee like the Holocaust, Rwanda, Armenian genocide, and native reservations and field locations. First, as it turns the case, their claims of racism and sexism and other oppressions are magnified by the construction of the citizen that as a fake identity category to justify extermination. We take their violence at the level of the home and take it to the level of the extermination camp. And second, it's a reason they can't solve their utopian demand. Gallman said that this makes political life impossible because our capacity to create change is limited to our connection to the nation state. We must first sever our relationship with sovereignty and become refugees
locked in a Eurocentric paradigm which perpetuates violence. Their interpretation is the boarding school where natives were sent to be cleansed of their culture of Churchill. In 1960, the American educational system has demonstrated to be locked firmly in the paradigm of Eurocentrism, and its focus also the historical heritage methodologies, conceptual structure, the kind of learning and not religious models broadly, and insulting, degrading functionally. So the education of America has existed for some kind of shape, all other than defining society, the disparity of power, exception, but they seek to bring out the inclusion of non-fair people, the methodological and conceptual, granting the candidate itself essentially tax. Second is accessibility. This is supercharged and two-way seek cross-sects when they have no articulation as to why they're necessary. They deliberation models or the structures which they are mimicking would be accessible to indigenous bodies. Their claim of education does not recognize the forced education and assimilation of native peoples into civil society. Not only is society an antagonism structured against them, but they were forced to unlearn their culture via the process of forced re-education. McGraw is and fourth. Indian schools constitute a particular nexus of political and educational apparatus. The Indian schools are the site where U.S. government policy directly promotes ideological production. The objective of the schools is to wean students for the tribal system and to union them with the U.S. civilization. Schools would far beyond industrial training, and their form of education is used as an instrument of cultural annihilation and assimilation. Smith, and when the intent of the Western educational system was to repeatedly eliminate the cultural identity of American Indian people, the goal of these schools was to make them as white as possible. Was the express purpose of the U.S. to eliminate all vestige of tribal and cultural identity. One of the main because of this annihilation was education. Charles Nix wrote, educating on the root matters by language, teach him to work, sent him to a school. It will exterminate the Indian, but it will develop a man school officials from Indians within a day, and their lifestyles were a sin and abomination to God. Education has created generations of people ashamed of who they are, and educational spaces are key to our criticism. We can't do this outside of debate grande, and for it's even more imperative for schools to reimagine the sites for emancipation for students, to be critical thinkers, to make a difference, to be willing to change futures, to commit critical self-reflexivity, and framework of revolutionary critical thinking by indigenous educational scholars where they think about the issues of sovereignty and self-determination and right pedagogy, the key survival strategies of state.
Now, in case I'm surprised that they extended this argument after what is it crossing. So, first of all, they conceded that the government fundamentally contradicts the thesis of the critique because the government is talking about fluidity. That means that land is not a question, and that means that land is not a question. They also concede that we don't think that the plan is a process, not the plan is a process, not an endpoint. They also conceded our argument that we broaden the definition of citizen such that when everyone's a citizen, no one's a citizen. That means that you're going to apply that argument on the critique here. Now they say that the state won't respond. Our weak evidence, however, one is durable fiat still a thing. The state will the durable fiat is still a thing, and two, yes, it will things like a minimum wage fundamentally prove that's in the weak evidence, which means that they just didn't read it. Now on to the critique. Now the critique is fundamentally wrong when they say psychological violence has an impact on the welfare state after accesses all of the psychological impact. Drop the fact that programs like tribal camp enact surveillance upon the natives, which means that necessarily when we reduce this, we reduce violence against natives, and that we also access psychological violence because when we look at the backgrounds of the natives, when we hand them debit cards that track the purchases, that is a form of psychological violence, and they say for all of their offensive framework don't apply to us. Our interpretation was the role of violence to validate the plan as a concrete process. The plan versus the concrete process. That means that we access the best economic links to land because only a concrete process can actually give back the land, while their forms of ideological thinking doesn't actually matter. That we don't link to that education stuff because we're not talking about the USFG. We're just talking about concrete processes, it's fundamentally supported by everybody. Now the Grande argument also takes out the critique because the Grande argument argues that education comes before but here education comes before the land. We don't link to the co-option. The co-option is that one is that like the tribal camp. One is that tribal camp like they love the tribal camp.
Answer the assimilation.
We don't assimilate the native. We don't assimilate the native. There's no reason why co-option can't include them now. Extend the provision there. Fairness is not a reason. Fairness is not a link when we don't center our arguments around the state. Now they've dropped the co-trend evidence. That means they've dropped the co-trend argument. The evidence first priority only matters when you have a concrete process. First priority only matters when you have a concrete process, i.e., material institutional structure always must be weighed above certain things. Now you're going to extend a weak evidence here. Specifically, that's a reason. That's a net benefit to the permutation. One is the fragmentation utopian, or possibly real, proposed like permanent fragments. The goal is too distant from reality. People always will have different goals, and two is alienation. The utopian goals are so permanent precedent and sense policy, uniting people couple arguments here. One is that the state is inevitable, which means that their alternative is totally screwed over any attempt to challenge the state will read and will result in the state reascribing its own powers to the question of survival logic view and see the political and widening have to always take over the government terms of critical. So all of their structured violence arguments are worse than an argument in a world with 10 police state. That they've also dropped the mayor Lincoln that mayor Lincoln without welfare surveillance citizenship wouldn't exist for citizens to require what the state needs to cultural validation, biometric values of race that is fundamentally happening right now during Chapter 10 extent. What? Now I'm going to answer all the links here. First of all, they're all contextual to the status quo. The first link is that we used to stay after they haven't responded to the fact that reformism is good, i.e. being conceded that Gideon v. Rainbow and things like that, Miranda v. Arizona are good. The court decision means that the reformism necessarily is not elite. They've also conceded our weak evidence, which is a plan is a process, not an endpoint, which means that we necessarily stop that. They say citizenship, however, they drop it on kids that when everybody's a citizen, no one's a citizen. The fundamental truth is that you can't be part of the native state, right? There's native sovereignty without being part of without being a citizen of the U.S. actually, i.e. On the framework, we said that our framework is necessarily exclusionary because we can't access because native people can't access. However, our weak evidence answers because our weak evidence talks about forming coalitions, i.e. you don't have to have power right now. Our weak evidence reverses the uniqueness of political participation because when we form coalitions, we necessarily give people more political power. Now, when you've conceded the state is endable, that means that that's the only thing that can do this.
Demand is screening the
Are you utopian demand is stuff?
So answer the link of what are utopian demand?
Our utopian demand doesn't screw up the natives. Our utopian demand doesn't screw up the natives. One because they drop the fact that welfare surveillance harms natives, which means that it necessarily doesn't screw up the natives. And two is that when they drop the weak evidence that only through concrete utopianism can we actually achieve.
Oh God, I'm fundamentally misunderstood in the one year about land is about the nation state. Our identities are constructed as intrinsically tied to nationality, that we are regaining citizenship, we give rights, we are given rights, we are demand rights, whatever. That occurs at the level of the nation, we fundamentally do not conceptualize ourselves as belonging to ourselves, but rather belonging to a preconceived structure of nationality, a preconceived structure of hierarchy and bureaucracy, which structures our very being, that we are ultimately ontologically tied to the rights that we are given or the rights that we demand, that we can no longer exist outside of this nationality. It's not in question whether land is key or not key, but right now they've conceded that leads to a politics of extermination. This outweighs, even if you don't give us the entirety of the criticism, this outweighs the avenue. The alternative is the only way to stop now. The abominative and syndicated extermination politics come from the nation, because anyone who resists their identity or tries to separate themselves from their identity, i.e. the figure of the refugee, is necessarily exterminated. That it even makes a fundamental uniqueness question, which is the extermination camps are already opening in the forms of things like reservation camps and the prison industrial complex, and we must resist the step of citizenship logic. And this is one of the axes that everyone is a citizen argument, because even if everyone is a citizen, everyone is still tied at the level of their native self to the state, which necessarily precludes living outside of the nation, which is why indigenous people have been so tortured in genocide in the past, is because they have resisted things like colonial systems of power. Now they say that when they accept the criticism, the government does not talk about physical land, but territoriality and the concept of the nations. And there's a nation and there's a state and a state of exception wherein people like natives lie and are thus exterminated. Now they concede that this makes political life impossible. This is one of the two reasons we're not going to get weeks. The rest will be on the criticism, but indicates that we conceive our entire identity as one of the state, which means that their utopian project will always be one of the state, even if it's better than the status quo, which is a questionable better in the first place. It's still going to be one of state power, because they fundamentally cannot conceive of themselves as one of existing outside of the nation. Go to the criticism for reasons you vote negative versus the big glaring one. They can say the alternative solves case. We curtail the entirety of the state, not just welfare, which means that they don't articulate a single reason why maintaining welfare, but no welfare surveillance is necessary in the 1 hour, which means that we reduce all state policy. All the other reasons they are screwed in the status quo, which controls the link term, because things like immigration and geography, prison industrial complex, the medical industrial complex, and police states are all alternative causes to the affirmative reason why natives and other people are screwed in the status quo, but they only curtail one of them. We curtail all of them. The second reason is the link of omission is conceived, which means that we don't have to learn another link other than you did not talk about natives in your 1C. So sorry, the Churchill evidence indicates that that omission is a strategic avoidance of this kind of colonial liberal projects always avoid things like nativism because they believe that they have other things more important, because it directly implicates their project, because ultimately the end of the day, they know deep down that whatever they accomplish will occur on stolen land. Now, that means that you fundamentally must prioritize the alternative. The third reason is that there's no two impacts that are conceived. That'll be on the impact debate just a moment. The last is they have conceived impossible realism, which means with all of their disads to the alternative are going away because it's not a question of specific strategy that we tell the settler, but since we want to link, we don't have to tell you. It's a question of natives building their own interpersonal coalitions and having nothing to do with state policy. They conceded the church evidence indicates that these coalitions are necessarily co-opted. Now, the impact debate, they conceded two impact scenarios. First is structural bias and hierarchy. The church evidence indicates that things like blood quantums have necessarily striated indigenous people and created a politics of extermination where we selectively include natives into our projects like the affirmative. The next is contingency. Star this on your flow. They conceded that every other impact is a relationship of colonialism because it derives from a culture of separating one from the other, which necessarily has created all of the racism, sexism, classism that the ones they identify. Third is psychological violence. They indicate that they solve all psychological violence. No, you don't. You solve the ones that's about welfare, but they concede that it's intrinsically tied to land. The Peters evidence is from a native specifically, who indicates that it is fundamental for them to force psychological survival. They permutation to both. You conceded the assimilation. They said that is welcoming the native into your project, but necessarily replicates these replicates because they also concede footnoting that adding it to the end of their project necessarily replicates how unimportant. They also concede the link to it. I'll do it here first as the state link that you enforce the legitimacy of the state, even if you don't expressly rejoice that it's good. The fact that you allow it to pass people back. Also, courts, they concede that there has never been a single good court decision by the United by the Supreme Court that has helped natives also see citizenship. That was Edwin Glover to the above reform is bad. Even if everyone is a citizen, classify the Agama evidence, Zurich evidence indicates it's a root cause. Now, fair now, this framework debate, we get to weigh the affirmative. They concede the church evidence that mere inclusion is that. They also concede the role of the ballot, which is to challenge oppression. The fairness is that they functionally conceded the fairness in that, which is a question of their accessibility. Their epistemology is including that it invites natives only if they wish to cooperate in political strategies, but it fundamentally screwed them over in the past. There's not a single piece of winning offense for the affirmative on the floor.
The question of the debate comes down to impossible realism versus concrete utopianism. No warrant extending the 2 hours to when impossible realism is able to solve. It's the reason why you should default to app analysis. You think our form of a process is good and better than impossible realism. That's the reason why you don't app and spin onto the case specifically. They read the Agama standards. However, Agama takes out their own critique. They conceded the one-year argument that Agama is specifically about the nation state, which is the reason why you take out the critique. Agama is about the refugee and how the refugee is unintelligible to the state. The CX of the I-1C prove that the indigenous is not a refugee, which is the reason why you link just as hard to this argument. Now, irrespective of that, they conceded the Nair piece of evidence that we read in the 2EC and the 1 hour that indicates that citizenship, we break down the forms of citizenship because the root cause of citizenship is from surveillance because of things like biometricization, i.e. the government can choose who is and who is not a citizen based on surveillance technologies. We curtail those surveillance technologies, and we also curtail surveillance technologies because we solve for the root cause of this argument. Now, they make a turn to this argument, at least in politics of extermination. However, we do not advocate for the politics of extermination involving the context of the nation state as a whole. We don't advocate for the entire nation state. Rather, we advocate why we should reform the nation state. We don't say the state is good in every instance. Rather, we say that we should reform the nation state. The Weeks argument is fundamental here. When we conceded that the Weeks is not an endpoint, rather they plan as a process which means we spill over to create coalitions that are able to challenge other forms of state domination, which is the reason why we don't like to think in politics of extermination. Now, he says that he answers the same form that everyone is a citizen, no one is a citizen, that you're still talking to the nation. However, this is fundamentally incorrect. The narrative of evidence is when everyone is a citizen, no one is a citizen, i.e. the state cannot discriminate who is and who is not a citizen. Fundamentally, don't link to this argument. Now, he says I concede that political life is impossible. That's not true because you conceded the nation state is inevitable in the 2 hour. You conceded the move piece of evidence, which is the reason why you lose this debate because you need to engage in the state. Now, you can go through the critique now for every day. You can go on the permutation or you should go on the permutation and there's a couple of permutations that like really concede for the Weeks evidence. You can vote on this card alone because it's you can go to this card alone. It's the reason why none of their possible realism arguments work versus it makes a couple arguments versus the strains of traditional utopia. Traditional utopia is bad.
able to solve this answer all of their imperial and also their impossible realism arguments that we affirmative unique able to solve this, which reasons definitely permutation because we indicate that our concrete utopian demand is critical, which means make a demand on the state to force the state to have a mode of recognition of what they've done is really messed up. He doesn't go for he doesn't advocate any reformism like in the 2NR, which means that you conceded that the state is able to be reformed, which is a reason why we're able to solve it. You've also conceded the link term and the tribal TAM allows for the federal government to control the native and to surveil the mean air. And it's also fundamentally impacts us because it says that surveillance is used as a form for the government to decide who is and who is not a citizen, and especially in the context of native arguments. That's also a benefit to the purchase of the alternative, just the alternative is not resolved. I'll answer because I can see what you said. The alternative is we should tell the state, however, you have conceded that the week's evidence indicates that your form of impossible realism uniquely in the context of critique is bad because you alien the indigenous, which you can't win the alternative solves the ad because you have to win that impossible realism is good in the first place. He says that the link of omission is the reason why you go negative. How this is answered in the 1 AM, not a link of omission just because we don't talk about names is not a reason why the relative permutation is able to resolve for this because the permutation accounts for indigenous analysis. Also, the 1AC is in the context of natives. The love for surveillance uniquely impacts natives on tribal land. The TAM argument, he says first priority. However, you can see in the Cochrane piece of evidence which indicates that endless first arguments like first priority and because we're endless leads to endless stereotypes, which means we never are able to solve material change, which is also a term for the critique because it means that indigenous will never be able to do things like get their land back because we never know what is right in the first place, which was conceded. Now they say impossible realism is good because the question of strategies have answered impossible realism. They say we conceded the impact they cover. You've also conceded that natives are empirical dominating the state psychological violence. However, we access the internal psychological violence because the welfare state means that people are always being psychological violence at any risk. The permutation is able to solve that. You say contingency. The permutation is also able to solve that. Cochrane evidence also distance the permutation. Now he says the permutation is footnoting. However, footnoting we're not footnoting because we place natives at the root of our analysis. Now we link to make new sense and status a link. However, there's no impact in this in the 2R. You can see the move evidence into the stated is inevitable, which means it's only a question of who can engage with the state better. It's only a question of who can reform the state. When you see the state, now we also see the political means that right-wing hacks like Ted Cruz taking over the government ultimately kill your movement. Now you said the courts like how this is not an argument that has an impact in the 2NR. It's not a reason why reformers is bad because you can see things like Wainwright. The case of Union versus Wainwright is good because it allowed for greater professionals to spill over to talk about rights. The app is also critical to create
I think I understand why I said that I have a higher threshold for what extending an argument in the 1AR is. I think that the way we extend the permutation is one that I just kind of draw the line at. I think it's very easy for the 1AR to just say, extend the perm and then maybe a couple lines after that, and then the burden on the 2NR is substantial in order to answer it. I think that in this debate, I don't know what the permutation really means in the 1AR. I don't know what it looks like. You say, I believe the exact lines were like, extend the permutation, also extend weeks, that's a net benefit to the permutation, and then you say something about different goals, and then you say something about Stalin and fascism. I don't think that constitutes enough for the 2AR spin, which is extremely heavy on this. I think that all of that is in the 2AC, and had it been in the 1AR, this would have been a pretty easy decision because there's, I think you need the permutation in order to win the debate. There's enough alt cause. I think the explanation in the 2NR about how there are all these other different institutional causes like the medical industry, the way that the prison industrial complex also works, that if you don't have the permutation, then you can't resolve all of that. And so there's an overwhelming need to vote on presumption, which I end up voting on. I think that the way, the Miles spends a little time, he does not spend much time on the permutation. I think it is sufficient though to answer it. Once the permutation is out of the way, I think that the alternative is probably underexplained, and maybe this move evidence would take it out. However, I think that there's enough implicit clash that, I think that there's a distinction between when Move is talking about withdrawing from the state, and I think that what they're spinning the alternative as. I think the line in the 2NR is that we don't have to tell you what the strategy is because you've identified yourself as the colonizers. I think that indicates that it's not a withdrawal so much as an engagement with the state of a different means, right? An antagonism towards the state. I think that even if there's a solvency deficit on the alternative, though, there's enough root cause stuff that I would just vote on the permutation. I also think that your answer to the Gottman stuff relies on you kind of winning that you resolve questions of surveillance, which the criticisms all cost to surveillance stuff means that you don't answer it. So, I mean, I'll give you the Nair stuff that maybe resolve some of it, and so it's not offense, and that doesn't really make sense in debate terms, but even then I think it's enough. That's where it's out of
Well, I guess I gave you more of the permutation than Armor did. So that's where I ended up voting on the permutation. I think the links that 2NR goes for all sort of depend on proving, one, that the state is irredeemable, and two, that attempts to engage with it or to enact change within the state or the nation state for the Algonquin argument are the worst options. So I think that is one of the most important things you need to be spending time on, and proving that thesis is actually one of the things you spend the least amount of time on in 2NR, and that becomes an issue because if you don't win that thesis, then that means there's no impact to your link arguments, right? And I think that the 2AR does point out that your extension of the court's link argument and the state argument sort of presuppose that those things are intrinsically bad because you have priorly proven that the state is always irredeemably violent and you have to work outside of it or remove it from the planet. But I think that there are several disadvantages to the alternative that are not as well answered in the 2NR as they need to be. There's this disengagement argument, which is spun into a right-wing takeover argument, the argument that no one will take radical politics seriously because not everyone has a full-blown revolutionary consciousness. I think these all at least prove that the permutation is, at least to me, is more palatable than the alternative is. I also think that the week's evidence, the explanation of the week's evidence in the 2AR and 1AR is solid enough to make me desire for a politics that has direction rather than like some sort of utopian, impossible goal. I think that evidence from my reading of it is pretty good, and so I think you need an impact to one of these arguments that isn't just state bad, right? Because otherwise, they've pushed back sufficiently enough to make it to minimize the impact of those arguments. I think that the net benefits to the permutation overwhelmingly outweigh.
I thought mostly but I feel like that's the issue that I was originally with. Was there enough extension of the permutation to 1AR? Maybe I give too much credit to the week's evidence that kind of says like this is true, that only like the combination of these things works. I think on the neg, the thing that I want to hear more about is like the assimilation disad. I don't think that there's a really good answer to this. Like in fact, there's not an answer to this. And I think because both the app and neg are kind of like in the context of US history, that like you control that debate, but you don't really like take advantage of it. I think that time spent here is probably better than time spent on the Algonquin stuff because you guys kind of like dabble about it, but like there's no sort of resolution at the end.